It's like, we don't exactly know what we're going to get into, but let's make some shit happen.
Well, g'day. This is a interesting episode of the Finding the Frothers podcast. If you haven't listened to it before, don't worry. A lot of people are fresh to it. This is probably the podcast that I should have done at the start of when I created it, but I went ahead and just got all frothy on interviews. Essentially, it's a workshop in a podcast. And I got to run it the other day with a bloke named Chandler Stevens. And I'll speak a little bit more about him in a moment. But the workshop is something that I've run for universities, alternate universities, individuals. I've run it for a co-working space. Essentially, whenever I feel like it's a good opportunity to expand someone's thinking about bringing people into their lives and also about consolidation of the most important people in their lives, I'll spring it on them because it's only a short one. This recording is only half an hour, but there's a bit of context that I'll add to it as well. So yeah, it's basically for anyone who wants to. Sometimes I'll call it how to have a beer with your heroes. Sometimes I'll call it just finding the frothers because some people can understand that. Other people maybe not so much. And so I will explain in this conversation with Chandler about what a frother is if you're totally new to this. But the core concept is really like, how can we find those frothers, those ultimate people, and bring them into our space so we can learn from them? And what are some of the strategies to do that? So I hope you really enjoy this. And to give you a little bit of a rundown about main man Chandler Stevens, he's kind of like an interesting version of a physical, like I guess, embodiment coach. So like he's really stepping into this space around how do we connect mind and body. Embodied cognition is a version of what we talk about. But on his website, it says he's into ecosomatics, which is a new term for me. It's a new term for Google too, because it's an emerging interdisciplinary field which connects embodiment practices such as dance and healing arts with ecological consciousness. So how are we all connected? How do we all come together and be connected? I'm frothing on that. That's a big topic for me at the moment. Just finished reading Climate by Charles Eisenstein. Get on it if you can. And the reason why me and Chandler had this conversation is because we're part of this group called Baby Bathwater. We'll reference it a lot because I didn't really plan on this being recorded as a podcast. I more wanted to just share this concept with our business group, which is kind of this eclectic mix of people from across the world who do all sorts of things. Business is a very loose term for the people in there. There's scientists and next level thinkers and everything you can think of from all different fields. And I've had many frothy conversations on my podcast with people from that group and through that connection. So sit back, enjoy. If you want to actually do the workshop, you can. All you need is a pen and paper or somewhere to write some stuff down. And it's really simple. It's basically like a 20-minute process, but we will chat with Chandler a bit about where he's at, what he's frothing on at the moment, and I really love his space where he's in. And so, yeah, really looking forward to hearing some feedback from you guys about this. I think it'll kind of level up the whole Finding the Frothers movement to get this kind of stuff out there and available that people can use whenever they want. Excuse me, this is live, right? Yeah, so without further ado, I'll give you Chandler Stevens and my conversation that I had the other week, and shoot me any feedback you like, as I'd love to continue to evolve this bad boy because we're co-creating the future. That's what we're doing. All right, hope you enjoy. Chandler Stevens, mate, welcome to the Finding the Frothers Workshop. First time one-on-one ever.
Hell yeah.
Mate, this is going to be interesting because, we're recording this for Baby Bathwater directly as a thank you, I guess, as well as a share. And also because I guess we just connected through Baby Bathwater, and based on the fact that we're kind of like, me and you this year definitely been sort of searching for direction, and I was kind of like, I have this process that seems to have worked, and it actually is linked with Baby Bathwater the whole way through it. So yeah, it'd be awesome to run it through with you for the guys and for yourself, most importantly.
Yeah, right. I love it. Let's do it.
Mate, give us a quick background on where you're at and I guess where you want to head, because it's such an interesting space, and I know already that there's a bunch of people within the group that you might have met half of them already that would be interested in this direction too.
Yes. So in terms of where I've been and where that kind of puts me now, for the longest time, my work revolved around two main questions. Like, what's good for a human animal in terms of movement? How do we bridge the gap between what the human animal evolved doing and what we do now? So a big part of like natural movement practice, joint mobility, uh, mitigating the damage of just like living life in a chair. And then the other main question is like, well, how do we bridge the gap between the fact that we live from like the neck up most of the time too? So in doing so, bringing a lot of somatic education, body mind practices. And so for the longest time, I considered myself sort of like a movement guy. It's like, oh, if you've got something going on with your body, we can sort that out, whether it's joint pain or this or that, back issues, whatever. But more and more as I was working with folks, we kept having like weird things pop up, like autoimmune diseases went into remission, or people would get divorces or they'd start new businesses or whatever. And it seemed like we would take some of the metaphors they were up against, like, I don't have the courage to take this leap, and we put them into body stuff and we work on jumping, leaping, landing. And a lot of issues would sort out in kind of like an eerie way. And so that whole movement as metaphor kind of idea is something that I'm like really like clicking with at this point, to get a sense of like, how do we sort out our big picture life stuff through a concrete embodied practice? And it turns out that's a weird as hell world for a lot of people, because we've inherited this sort of Cartesian split of a culture where like body stuff, mind stuff, they're sort of implicitly separate in a big chunk of the world. And so it's got me kind of questioning like, what's the best way to make this a viable path? Because it intuitively makes sense. Like, it's a no-brainer when we talk through it. It's like, oh yeah, I bite my tongue in this and this and this. Oh, does your jaw tense when you do it? Yeah, it does. Well, we've got a clue there, and we can unpack that at that point. So that's the direction that I want to take things more and more. If that kind of gets a sense of like the backstory and the direction forward from here.
Yeah, and we're talking about just before offline that it's interesting that now that you've kind of started to step into that space, you've lost a few followers, and people are kind of like, well, I don't really get what you do anymore, and so it's kind of like, and when we were talking about, that's a fucking benefit potentially down the line. It doesn't seem like it at the start, but potentially down the line, they're the people that are gonna like not only follow the work that you do, but actually add to it by being more of a seeker, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the amount of hate mail has definitely gone up, which on the one hand, it's kind of funny too. It's like, oh, all right. I mean, you can still Google the hip mobility articles and all that stuff. It's just we're going to add this other dimension to it, and people are going to meet it wherever they're coming from too. And so, yeah, sort of thing, not for everybody, because it takes a little thought, and that's for better or worse, it's not an easy thing. So there you have it.
Yeah, I guess I feel that a little bit from mine because my company is all about a pro drinking movement. So like, whereas most people are about sobriety and alcohol is kind of evil, I like to play in the space of if we can treat it as a ritual, then it's worthy and it's here to stay and it's here to play with. And yeah, so I get a fair bit of stick, especially when I support different things, and I fucking love it. It's good because otherwise it can get boring, man. So
Yeah.
part of this workshop really is like, well, the whole mentality around the workshop is something I call Finding Frothers. So a frother is really like, just to explain it more, there's a battle between California and the west coast of Australia, between who came up with this terminology, and it's around surfing. You've probably heard snowboarders use it, and it's like on Urban Dictionary, it's like it's being totally amped. You'll hear people saying, I'm frothing, man. Like, I just had the best surf of my life. That was a really poor American accent. Apologize. And so, yeah, I've kind of, it's a word I've used for a long time, surfing, and me and my friends used it a lot in our like early 20s and stuff. And I've kind of evolved it a little bit, and it's really based around kind of like when you have a one-on-one connection with someone and you feel that resonant energy, and I guess you start frothing on the same wavelengths, and rising tides all ship rise. Yeah, it's kind of that vibe, and there's an extended resonance, which is actually kind of understood more in terms of like extended group flow. And I'm super interested in flow states. And Jamie Wheel, who's part of the groups, he's become my mentor. I'll talk a bit more about that later. But so the whole process is like, how can we identify the people who get us frothing that we've already got access to? But then how can we think about like, where do we want to progress into? Which steps do we want to go down? And who do we want to bring into our lives that can allow us to froth harder and access more flow states? So kind of, I'd say like, how can we access a froth state to access, which is a trigger to a flow state? And that's a bit of fun just playing around with those. So the process is really like to just have a little think. I don't know if you've got a pen and paper in front of you. I can write it down as well. But
I got it.
I want you to identify three different people in your life. So the first is someone that you have access to whenever you want, at the drop of a hat. And just think of that person that whenever you sit down with them, you walk away going, whoa, like that was awesome. And it can be someone like really close to you, or it can be, you know, someone you see once a week or whatever it is, or you just get them on the phone, but someone of huge inspiration. And I call that an anchor frother.
Yeah. So I'm actually doing this 4-year training with the guy, but his name's Jeff Holler. He's kind of badass in the Feldenkrais community, sort of body-mind discipline. But man, he's become a hell of a mentor here recently, and I realized he's way more available for support than I would have thought. Like first ring in, click, pick up, chat for hours. Like, oh shit. Okay, this is so that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's perfect, because I think like you can already hear from how you're speaking about your passion for what you wanted to do. It's kind of like, well, this guy's already like that far ahead of you, and he can hear that you're stepping into a similar space, and he's like, of course he's gonna, I guess, show you potentially more time than he'd show other people who are still a bit, you know, I think you've got more clarity than you think you do, which is awesome, and you've already got like, you know, the achievements that you've achieved to back it up. And he already sounds like someone who's going to play a pivotal role in where you head. So that's awesome. The second one is more of like a boundary frother. So given that you're sort of true north at the moment, or not even a true north, maybe it's a signpost of you kind of, I'm aiming sort of wide, and I know where I'm going to land in that kind of embodied cognition space, the progressive mind-body science. Is there someone, you live in Seattle, is there someone that you have that you're seeing on your periphery, whether it's through social media or something, that if you really just sort of spend a little bit of extra time, it could be what Jeff was a little while ago, that you could have direct connection with them?
Yeah, you know, there's a guy sort of like a rough acquaintance, a colleague, maybe like with an extra 10 years on me, but he's doing big things in the general kind of embodiment space too. And, you know, we'll chat, you know, once a year or so maybe. But a guy named Mark Walsh, who is just like, what I love about him too is he's got like the entrepreneurial business bent. Like he's not a guy to fuck around, which makes him wickedly effective in what's a pretty nebulous body of work. So yeah, he comes to mind too. You said a boundary frother?
Yeah. Okay. So if you think we're creating a bit of like a ecosystem circles, trying to think of what the term would be. Don't know why it's not coming to me. But anyway, you kind of got your nucleus. You've got your people that you can rely on as much as possible. And really it's just how can we draw these people into the nucleus? And it's not to say that Mark's going to definitely become someone that you could call every day if you really needed to, but it's just to think of him in a kind of like, okay, well, I only speak to him once a year, but I feel like he doesn't know right now how important he is to my progression. And you might just be watching him from a distance, but how is he going to play a role in kind of being more important? And sometimes a lot of the time, these people that are on our peripheries, until we say something, they don't know. They're kind of like, you know, we might swing them a Facebook comment every now and then, but like so at least something that Baby Bathwater has taught me is that, you know, you reach out to someone with a good intention, you're going to be able to get a call with them eventually. Like as long as you're if you've got that right mentality around how, like where you're heading, they're going to want to speak to you because you're heading in the right direction, and you're going to, at some point, you're going to become super useful to them as well. It's going to be a mutually beneficial transfer of froth. And so That's awesome. And so who's the third one? Which is I was calling it a hero frother, but they're all heroes, I think. So I've changed it to kind of like universal. Like if there was one person, who would that one person be that you'd like to bring into kind of your circle of froth?
So this is like wild hope sort of frother person.
Anyone in the world. They've got to be alive.
Well, yeah, shoot, man, no time machines.
I only say that because that's on my podcast. I ask if who's a dead person that you still draw strength from, because it is a really interesting question. But yeah,
yeah, man, I'm thinking. So someone who's alive, it's funny that we're talking about sort of embodied cognition. Like Francisco Varela comes to mind as a guy who's like deep in it with cognitive science, embodied cognition, sort of ethics, metaphorical side of it too. So Francisco Varela, I guess, would be the guy who comes to mind for that.
And the interesting thing is kind of like when you start piecing this together, the reason, I guess, like Jeff sounds like pretty, into the space as well. You're already making moves yourself. By speaking to Mark about this kind of stuff, potentially you're probably only one degree of separation away from Francisco already. And the interesting thing about this workshop, when I run it live, it doesn't tend to be, it's usually entrepreneurs or students or something like that. And when I ask people that question, I'm like, okay, well, how many people know who they want to meet? And most of them are like, yeah, cool, whatever, Richard Branson or something. I go, how many people have written that down that they wanted to meet that person? Most of the hands go down. How many people have actually told another person they want to meet that person? And pretty much no one's still got their hand up. And I'm like, whether or not you believe in the universe, pulling people into your vortex, if you're not telling other people who you want to meet, how are they supposed to help you find them, right? So even just by just stating the fact that you want to meet Francisco, you've already taken another step towards meeting him, pretty much. It's kind of like, it's a given.
Yeah.
Especially with sharing this video. Like, who knows who's going to listen to my podcast? And I already know, just listening to you, so many people are spouting off in my brain about within the embodied cognition space. I'll just be like, swing them a message. And there's plenty, I know within Baby Bathwater, they know a lot of people in the space as well. So part of the process is really like, so there's it's kind of like a new Indigenous term, because it's English, but yeah, Australian Aboriginals, First People, they have this really cool term for so when something's awesome, they'll call it deadly. Yeah, so they call it deadly, and I love it. So they'll be like, "Oh, that's deadly, man," and I'm like, "Yeah, fuck yeah, that's a sick." So I would say ripping, like that would be my Aussie slang for that. Maybe awesome or whatever. And obviously, there's the 7 deadly sins, and so I'm a copywriter by trade as well. So the 7 deadly frothers is kind of like the way that I think about this circle, because it becomes more of a transition. So what I like to tell people to do is to go, okay, we've got 7 deadly frothers. Your 1 and your 2 are your anchors. So you've got Jeff already. What I would suggest is thinking about another anchor right now, putting that down. It can be, as I said before, it could be your mum, could be someone. You don't have to tell me about who this person is, but that's fine. Your number 3 it could potentially be Mark, because you've already connected with him, right? So, and you speak to him once a year. So how I'd like you to think about that is kind of like, well, is Mark, I've already connected with him. He's not really in my boundary. He's probably like creeping his way in a little bit closer to the anchor, to more of like a Jeff, right? And so that's a transitional phase. And then your 4 and your 5 are your true boundaries. They're your guys who you haven't really even reached out to, but you've been following, but they're within your reach. And then your 6 and your 7s are your Franciscos. And so you could have as many of these categories as you want, but I always say, like, I think beyond your anchors, you don't want to have too many up there, because it allows you to have focus. And I think, especially given the world that we're in at the moment with social media, we all have so many, we have so many mentors in one way, shape or form. Like, people are following thousands of people, and And if you think about like a old school samurai to a student, like how many mentor, if they had Instagram back then, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see like what a modern day student, like how many people do they follow? Or do they just still like, well, fuck social media, I'm trying to learn off this ultimate guy of wisdom. So what I say is like, if they're there, reflect that in your social media to an extent, to what you feel comfortable with. But if you had, say, sort of like, if you were following 20 Franciscos, I think it makes it a little bit harder to really understand Francisco's teachings to potentially become a student in that instance. And that took me a while to learn as well.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that you take all the funniness off your Instagram and stuff, because sometimes you need shit to take your mind off stuff. So my business is all around, like I said before, it's all about like alcohol and conscious consumption of alcohol. But really the play is around conscious consumption of everything. And I've got a concept called vice optimization. So that applies to this as well, because your phone is a vice, right? So it's not like delete Twitter, delete fucking Instagram, become a hermit, and maybe that's cool for a little while. Like, yeah, sure, have your Sabbaths, but we do like to fuck around. So that's why I think like vices are important. And yeah, and when you can turn a vice from a negative into a positive, then that's when it becomes powerful. And that's when like Instagram and these tools that we've got can become super fucking powerful, because we can have essentially free access to our universal frothers, so long as we're just a bit more aware of it. So we're not ingesting too much information. How can we really have that embodied cognition? Back to, I guess, what we're talking about in the first place. How can we practice the work of these teachers when we've got too much information coming in? And I'll give you a little example of, I guess, my process of this and it in action. So my two boundary frothers were around and when I started this process, it was last year, start of the year. Hadn't been to Baby Bathwater yet or anything. And I was kind of like, well, I really need to kind of understand more of my purpose. What we were talking about offline, Ikigai. And I have a friend, Sarah. She's got a company called Fuck Giving. And so she's kind of been a good friend of mine for a while. And she's awesome. And she's really good at helping. That's pretty much her MO, is helping people figure out what they give a fuck about and then do more of that. Right. So she was my anchor. And then Dan, my friend, who's a mindset coach as well. Phenomenal dude. I was living with him at the time. So I was like, yeah, make sure I'm really cognizant of the fact that they know how important they are in my life to where I'm trying to progress, and being vulnerable with them and go, I'm kind of a bit fucking lost here. Like, I know where I think I'm heading, but I'm still not 100% sure. My transition, my number 3, who's now become a really good friend of mine. His name's Grant Trebilco. He runs a charity which is all around like taking people surfing for mental health. And the way that he'd sort of progressed his business was kind of, I didn't quite know at the time, but I was like, I need to get close to this guy. And there's kind of like a feeling around it. And he'd become he'd come off the boundary into that transition. Through last year and this year, his business has actually provided an element to part of my business, which was missing, which was kind of, how do I bring people together into a space and have them have open conversations, which is triggered a group flow. And that's basically what he does for people with, or just ordinary people, but also people with mental health issues. They get together, they have a chat, and then they go out surfing. And that's really the framework for what I created with my drinking circles. My 4 and my 5 were interesting. One of them I've interviewed on my podcast now, and I hung out with him once when I finally got to hang out with him after Instagram messaging for a few months. He ran a workshop for me straight away. So he had instant impact. It was crazy. So, and then the 5, also another guy who lived in my town in Sydney when I was living in Sydney. This was weird because he was meant to be, I wanted to really get to know him better. But I walked past him on the street and I had his book in my hand. I was going down to read his book at the beach. And he stopped me and he talked to me like I knew him. And he didn't know I had the book. And he got me completely mixed up with someone else. And so I felt awkward and I didn't know what to do. And so I just pretended I knew him. It was this weird thing. And so, and after that, I've seen him at events and I was just like, no, it's too fucking weird. So I haven't spoken to him since, but he's since come back into my life through another frother of mine who I've moved up here to be closer to. So I feel like the universal pull is like bringing us back together, and I'm just going to come clean with him because I'm more confident now. But and number 6 is probably number 6 is the most pivotal in this. I'll mention number 7, Tim Ferriss. He's not there anymore, but he had a big role in kind of the way I developed my business. Number 6 is Jamie Wheal, who's in Baby Bathwater. And so after I'd told people about who I wanted to connect with, that was when I kind of got connected with Baby Bathwater. And then I spoke at the one the 2 islands ago. Jamie was the first one to speak. And I didn't know he was going to be there. And then when I was speaking to Mike, he was like, oh yeah, Jamie's speaking. And I'm like, fuck. I was just talking about stealing fire and this process. And I wanted to talk to Jamie about froth state into flow state. And then since then I've trained with the Flow Genome Project, and Jamie's kind of right up there now. And the reason I know about embodied cognition is because of him. So as part of the training was, and now I'm friends with his mentors, so I can ask them about those questions. And so he's kind of up into a space where I can lean on him now. He's probably still like more around a 3, you know? Although if I had a real big issue, I'm sure I could get in contact with him. It's just we'd, you know, live far apart. So the process, and Tim's kind of, and when I dissect why I didn't connect with Tim, is I just want to thank him. It's like I didn't have a purpose like where I did with Jamie, where I wanted to kind of progress based on his knowledge. And if I had a thought about it, I probably could have worked on that with Tim. But that's a really key point to this whole thing, is like making sure that all the people that are in this list, you want to progress with them. And you kind of, even though you don't have to have it full concrete, you have an idea that when you sat down with them for a coffee or a beer or whatever, this is where I'd take the conversation. And I feel like that manifests stronger into fruition. And that's just been through my reflections on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's pretty slick.
Yeah, because I think it's taken me a whole year to kind of work it out. And I feel like you are already a lot closer to your, 6 and 7 than you think, just based on where you've already made the intention of heading. And I think just through this process, you're already a lot closer to Francisco than you think, like super close. But the thing is like, I feel like it's an unfolding. Like once you make the intention, then you will have the conversation with whoever your Mike is, and they'll be like, oh yeah, he's my buddy. Like fuck, if you'll be at the same event as him, and you put yourself into the same spaces. And yeah, it's a process that I then will repeat when I feel the need to. Could probably be like a yearly thing or a 6-monthly thing, and just to see where all these people have factored in, and then how others have. I've worked with them, served a purpose, and now moved on, and they're still there. But, I've progressed to here. So where I'm headed has changed. So that's kind of when I run the workshop, I've got some sort of hacks and stuff to getting in contact with people, but I feel like you don't really need that. That's kind of for the more entry level people. That's the basic concept of having identified those 7. And then making sure that the ones at the bottom are, and making it clear to people, you don't have to use the term frother, like come up with your own term. Because I know in North America that actually some of my Canadian girlfriends have been like, no, Benny, we're not calling it that, because it means something sexual. And I was like, okay, cool. I was like, but you guys say double fisting, and that means something different in Australia. So but anyway, that's another story. So yeah, I feel like that's right. Yeah, I think so that framework, have a crack at it. But yeah, like I said, the most important thing is letting people know that they're your frother, person who's really important and integral to where you don't need to have it all worked out to where you're heading. I still don't. I'm still in a big transitional phase. But is there any? Yeah. Do you have any questions about that, or is anything pinging to mind? Like, oh shit, maybe I should reach out to this person now, or I could actually reach out to them right now.
The thing that clicks with me is just even like acknowledging for like the anchor folks. It's like, hey, you're big for me, and like even just being able to open up that line of communication. Like when I even asked in the Baby Bathwater group, it was like, oh shit, the floodgates opened, and all of these folks, yourself included, like commented. And it's like, oh wow, shit, you can get what you need if you like know what it is and ask for it, which is just it's a good reminder. Be like, oh yeah, acknowledging, letting these people know, because who knows, maybe they're having a shit day and they need someone to let them know, like, you're deeply meaningful for me. And even just that reminder is like, that's pretty key. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not until you break that you understand. Like, and I just did sort of a long post on where I was at, because I've had a bit of a rough few months, that you realize how held you are by a lot of people, and you're like not alone. Sometimes it takes for you to crack, for that to occur.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's useful, and I'd really love to hear where you're at with like what your final 7 are, and then what your plans are. And I'd love to assist if I can help, intro you to some people. And there's people, like I said, Baby Bathwater's got. I'm sure there's someone who knows Francisco. Like, it wouldn't surprise me.
It's like insane how connected that group is. Yeah.
Yeah. But like I said, it's kind of, as well, it's up to you to either go, okay, now's the time for me to reach out to that guy, or if it unfolds, then it unfolds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that, I'm excited to hunker down and figure out, like, okay, who are the 7? How do I start to actually build whatever foundation for the lines of communication, right? And similar thing is just like, even saying, reaching out to these people, reaching out to those people, like, hey, I want to meet that person, all of that. I mean, it is just crazy how interconnected we are and how much access we have to everyone in the world. So I'm stoked to sit down and actually flesh out, like, okay, who are these 7? What are the different tiers? Like, that's exciting.
Yeah. The best thing I heard the other day, and like I told you offline, I've focused a lot of my time on the ecological crisis, whatever anyone wants to call it. But I really think what we need is a reunion, a coming back together of all things, human and otherwise. Was that someone said, we already know everyone that we need to know. We already have all the technology that we need to have. Everything is here. All the resources are here. Everyone's at the party already. All we need to do is activate it. And that's kind of, I guess, where we're falling down at the moment as a civilization. And we need to get everyone on board, and we need to make sure everyone knows they're invited to the party, and help everyone get there, I guess. So that's kind of this mentality I've got at the moment. I think it, you can have as many universal frothers as you want. Anyone can connect anyone if they put their minds to it. And I'm excited to release this on the Facebook page and see how babies would add to this, because there's so many brilliant thinkers in there. Yeah, because this is a very, I guess, basic process, but seems to work.
Seems like it. Yeah. I mean, it makes intuitive sense. So by all means, man, let's do it.
All right. Ripping. That's pretty much it, mate. Well, yeah, I'll pause the video, and much love to everyone out there in the Baby Bathwater universe.
You guys are awesome.
Quick one, guys. To keep this show afloat, feel free to subscribe and share the love. Maybe even leave a cheeky comment review. That'd be awesome. You can find the show notes on my website at bennywallington.com. And finally, this episode was sponsored by my grandma, Joyce Reichel, who passed away last year from dementia. She was one of the original frothers and would talk to anyone on the bus, train, or wherever, and generously impart her energy and wisdom. So if you see an elderly person who is looking for someone to froth with, go and hang out with them. They've got the best stories. Also, a huge shout out to our producer, Lily Haynes, for bringing this to life, and Billy Otto, who created that beautiful introduction in true Billy Otto style. Also, my buddies in Australia and the UK, who have been super generous in swinging me feedback. In a way, all of you guys are sponsoring me with your time. Love to the guests, past and future, and also to you guys for listening. Ciao for now. You!